affected by the loss. You moved. You had to change locations for him as well.
Right.
A lot of shifts and a lot of changes. And when it affects more than just us, like as mothers, it affects our children, it's a much deeper core that's affected because we know we'll get through it. But when we look at our kids, and we see what they're going through, you want, the natural mothering instinct is to jump in and make it all right. Well, sometimes you can't. Sometimes they have to muddle through it too.
Right.
And do you feel like you're coming to the end of that? Do you feel like you're coming to the end of, some sense of peace, some sense of truth, some sense of it all?
For sure. That's why I feel so uncomfortable because, like I said, just almost for the past 2 years, the level of experience and growth and confrontation with myself that I've had to go through, and not to mention all of those externals, losing my son's father and also moving, those all, they just consume your world.
Right.
And so, having been married for so long with all the chaos as well that the marriage brought, and then everything after it that's happened, there was so much stress that all of a sudden I actually feel like, there's nothing going on. And so I do feel like I'm at the end.
Yeah, but hold on to that because something's about ready to jump out of the bushes for you, and you can embrace it, and you can really, start to laugh and frolic and have a good time. Hang on, Karen, because I do believe, God bless us, Joan's on the phone. So let's hang tight and see if this is Joan. Hold on. Hello, is this Joan?
Hey, Lisa. We had a dead phone,
Joan.
So there was stress on both ends. But I'm glad to be
God
here.
bless you for calling. Thank you so much for calling in. We were filling the lines with stress talk. So we're going to everybody, my audience, welcome Joan Borysenko, author of Fried, Harvard-trained scientist and psychologist. Welcome, Joan. Thank you so much for being on Unlimited Reality.
You are so welcome. I've been looking forward to this.
Oh, I'm so glad. I've been looking forward to it, too. We're going to have a fun show, and I love your topic. You have a great topic for the global effect of what's going on with everyone's life. Was this really inspired more personally, or was it inspired more because of the global reality of what's happening right now?
Well, first of all, I've always been interested in what makes people resilient, what makes them creative, who thrives in really difficult times, and really who despairs and gives up. And, of course, there's always, I think, a personal aspect to the things that intrigue us. And for me, that was my, my own history, because earlier in my life I wasn't a very resilient person. And when I was challenged by stress, my nervous system really went out of whack. And when that happens, you release a lot of cortisol. You were talking about stress. That affects your memory. It affects your creativity. And I decided early on I had to deal with that. So I've been learning to be resilient since my 20s. And then, as you know, I founded a mind-body clinic with Dr. Herbert Benson at one of the Harvard teaching hospitals. And I began to really look at the difference between people who'd been through, divorce, job loss, serious illness, because I was running an AIDS clinic, a cancer clinic, and a clinic for people with stress-related disorders. And I began to get a good sense of what we're going to be talking about. Who is it that really makes the proverbial lemonade out of lemons? That in terms of resilience, they don't go back to being who they were before the illness or before the divorce. They go on to be something very different. They go on to develop wisdom. They often develop a sense of compassion for others, tremendous strength that were latent become manifest, and they can often look back, and while they wouldn't want to repeat the experience, say that they certainly developed through it. And now there's a very big interest in resilience because of what's going on in the world. And there have also been a lot of studies, like who are the resilient PEOs, POWs, PEO, where did that come from? POWs, who in concentration camps or, God forbid, genocide situations, any difficult situation, manages to come out still functional. Then, of course, with children, it turns out, I think most people don't realize that, but adverse childhood experiences have, even 50 years later, are a predictor of your health. And the more adverse childhood experiences, the more likely you are to have health problems, mental health problems, behavioral problems, and addiction problems years later. But, of course, some children who live in neglectful or abusive circumstances manage to come out all right. And I think these are major questions that we need to ask of ourselves, and that is, how can we learn how to be resilient? And how can we form a society, by the way, that treats its children better and treats its veterans better and its troops, so that less PTSD gets developed? We all know what a big problem that is.
Right, and it's one of those things that they love to prescribe pills for, and they love to put you on antidepressants, and they love to mask what it is you're going through, where it's not really evolved through the system, it's not really evolved through the consciousness, it's just masked. And so your work is so poignant in this regard, because you combine all the body, mind, spirit combinations of holistic health, in addition to addressing how to overcome this and how to, also kind of target when you are in burnout. You list 12 aspects of what, the stages of burnout or aspects of burnout, and maybe we can get into that a little bit. You have,
yeah, we will. And there really are two things here that my last two books, Lisa, the very last one was Fried, called Why You Burn Out and How You Revive, that we're about to get into. The book previous to that was called It's Not the End of the World, How to Develop Resilience in Times of Change. And that's what I've just been talking about, who is resilient. And it has a great deal to do with the subject of burnout. So it's a good segue, and we'll get to cover them both, I think, in our time together.
Wonderful. Well, you've tackled a really wonderful topic for the times, and there's very few people who aren't feeling some element of their buttons pushed, and they're at their wits' end on many different levels. And you also, you really categorize this, which I really loved, is that you say burnout is not stress. There's a difference. So let's talk a little bit first about what the, burnout versus stress.
Okay. Well, burnout itself comes from becoming so unbalanced, feeling so driven to get everything done, that eventually it creates a separation between you and life, so that you're just living to work. Your values die away. Here it's like Christmas or something, and you decide you'd rather work than be with your family. You begin to develop a number of stress-related disorders, and there are stages of this. We'll go through this. But it starts with a place that I think the majority of us are at these days, and that is we feel overwhelmed. I was recently talking to a group of psychologists, and I asked them, I said, raise your hand if you feel overwhelmed and like there's so much on your plate you can never get it done. And virtually every hand in the room went up. And I think all of us are really just suffering from too much information, a huge overload, much more than we can reasonably do. And some people are able to just kind of let that go and do what they can. They know how to say no. They can easily disappoint somebody else so that they can have a life themselves. They love what they do. It's rewarding for them. And they also are able to say, I need time with my spouse, or I need time with my kids. And I have to tell my boss what's doable and what's not doable, because I understand that if I take on too much, then the quality of my work will go down. That's the kind of person who does not burn out. And the kind of person who does burn out is the person, it seems so sad, but the person who's most idealistic, who most wants to do their very best, who most wants to be able to bring forth what's in them as a gift to the world. And they will often burn out first because they'll put the work before anything else. And, and feel really like, oh, I have to get this done. Or the other thing that causes burnout, for example, is being in a job where you're a square peg in a round hole. And the job itself, the demands of the job are not in line with your particular talents. That burns people out. But, you go around these days and people say to each other, I'm fried. And when I decided to write this book, I myself was fried. And I said, I won't write this book until I figured out how not to be fried. And that actually took 4 years before I was in a position to write the book from a place of integrity. And I thought, I have so many case histories from working with people, but I decided I would collect case histories in an interesting way. And that is, I started to post questions about burnout on Facebook. And I have a very large community of fans. I hate that word. Of people a very large community. It really is just a community on Facebook. And we began to go into depth with people's experiences of burnout, of how it was they had revived themselves. And it was really great. So the book also has got quite a number of little quotes and snippets and anecdotes from people on Facebook that I combined, of course, with my clinical experience in the literature on burnout. But let me get specific. Here's how you measure burnout. There are 3 scales.
Okay.
And your listeners can think about these scales and think about whether they might be burned out. The first is emotional exhaustion. When you get to that point, you're so emotionally exhausted, you can't listen to people. You can't be present to people. You have a chance to do something wonderful, and you're just so emotionally exhausted, there's no room for even enjoyment. So emotional exhaustion. The second is called, at Berkeley, Christina Maslach, who invented this scale, calls it depersonalization. And what she really means by that is you lose your capacity for empathy. So let's take this example. Healthcare providers. Healthcare providers need to have empathy. The relationship is the medicine.
Right.
Being listened to is so important. But when you lose your empathy and the person before you becomes an annoyance and you get snarky with them, that really is a big part of our healthcare dilemma. You don't get very good healthcare when that's what's happening. So we've just mentioned emotional exhaustion, and I like to use the term compassion fatigue for that second. And even if you're not a healthcare provider, if you find yourself getting snarky with your loved ones, that's compassion fatigue. You can't relate to them. There's just nothing left in you because you are so emotionally exhausted. I always know.
Great point.
If I start to get snarky with my husband, I catch it right away. That's a symptom of burnout for me. He's such a love. The third aspect of burnout is that you start to function poorly.